The day before the wedding, the high-priced wedding dress customized by my husband arrived. Stroking my slightly bulging belly, I proposed a divorce to him. Christopher's secretary called, crying and explaining, "Madam, it's all my fault. I didn't figure out the style you like. Please don't be angry with President Christopher." Christopher's gentle soothing voice came from the phone, leaving me only with the words, "Don't regret it." I packed my things and left without a trace of nostalgia. After packing, I was about to drag my suitcase and leave when I happened to run into Christopher coming back. Christopher frowned when he saw the suitcase in my hand, and his tone was cold. "Scarlett, why haven't you calmed down yet? I don't have time to play around with you." With such a cold and stiff tone, anyone who didn't know better would think he was reprimanding a subordinate. When I used to have a little temper, Christopher would always hold me and patiently explain to me to calm me down. Now he just used one sentence to brush me off. But this time, I wasn't making trouble with him. Instead, I was serious. I stared at him calmly. "Christopher, let's find a time to get a divorce." Christopher tugged at his tie irritably, thinking I was still speaking out of anger. "Ava didn't know you hated white wedding dresses. What's wrong with making do for tomorrow?" Ava is a girl in her early 20s. She became Christopher's personal secretary right after graduation. They were so close that they were almost inseparable. There was a joke in the industry that wherever Christopher was, Ava was within 3 steps. Even for the wedding dress, Christopher let Ava decide the style instead of me, his legitimate wife. So it was only on the day before the wedding that I found out the wedding dress was the white color I hated the most. I didn't blame Ava for choosing this style. After all, most people would think a wedding dress should be white. But Christopher should have remembered his promise from back then. Apparently, he had forgotten it now. So there was no need to hold this wedding anymore. Seeing that I still held the suitcase tightly and refused to let go, the irritation between Christopher's brows deepened a bit more. "Where can you go with a baby in your belly? Besides, you're not a young girl like Ava. Aren't you ashamed to play the game of running away from home at your age?" Even though I had already decided to get a divorce, my nails still dug deeply into my palm. This wasn't the first time I heard such words. Not long after Ava came to the company, Christopher often complained to me non-stop about how careless and troublesome she was, like sending the wrong documents, losing materials. He even regretted why he had hired her in the first place. At that time, I spoke up for Ava, comforting Christopher that she was just a fresh graduate and it was inevitable for her to make mistakes in the workplace. But I don't know when everything changed. When Ava called, sobbing, saying that she seemed to be followed and was scared. The man who had once complained about her being troublesome picked up the car keys without hesitation and rushed out the door, leaving me only with a hasty back view. A woman's intuition is very accurate. Their unusual superior-subordinate relationship was hard for me to accept. I asked Christopher to transfer Ava from the secretary position. Christopher got angry with me for the first time. He said that if I didn't understand the company's affairs, I shouldn't interfere. Probably feeling that his attitude was too intense. He then softened his tone and promised me that he would keep a distance from Ava. But there is no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. When the rumors reached my ears, in the eyes of outsiders, Ava had seemingly become Christopher's capable assistant. No one knew that there was still me, his forgotten wife, at home. When I confronted him in a state of breakdown, Christopher, however, looked at me coldly and admonished, "Ava is merely a young girl. She knows nothing. I'm simply trying to teach her more. Why are you being so fussy with her at your age? You're just being overly sensitive because you have nothing to do at home." These words stabbed deeply into my heart. Later, I stopped making a fuss and no longer paid attention to the relationship between him and Ava. Christopher thought I had seen things through, but only I knew that the walls of my heart that I had built for him were collapsing layer by layer. I tried hard to hold back the tears in my eyes, and my hand pulling the suitcase was trembling slightly. "Christopher, in your eyes, I'm not worthy of doing anything now, am I? Not worthy of getting angry, not worthy of having things I dislike. I looked up at the man I had loved for 7 years. From 22 to 29 years old, time seemed to have left no marks on him. He had just gained some of the charm of a mature man. Christopher seemed to have changed nothing, but I knew that everything was different from what it was 7 years ago. Now I don't want to be the so-called older woman in your mouth. I want to be myself, Scarlett. Cancel tomorrow's wedding. Let's find some time to get divorced. After saying that, I turned around and pulled the suitcase to leave. Christopher was enraged by my words, and the sound of smashing things came from behind. Fine, don't regret it. Let's see who would want you with a baby in your belly. But I didn't stop for a second. I took my things and left this 7-year cage. On the way, a couple walked towards me. The two of them were sharing an ice cream, taking bites one after another. The girl had a bright smile on her face, and her happiness was palpable. The boy's eyes were filled with overflowing tenderness and indulgence. Watching them, my eyes became moist. Wasn't Christopher at 22 the same with me? My first encounter with him was a rather cliched case of a hero saving the beauty. When I was working as a part-time waitress in a restaurant to earn my living expenses, a customer started getting handsy with me. But the manager ignored my calls for help and even didn't allow others to come to my rescue. Just as I was determined to smash a wine bottle on that person's head, someone beat me to it. That person was Christopher. He protected me behind him like a god. He smiled at me and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm here." This was the first time I experienced the feeling of being protected. But I also knew that Christopher was a famous top student at University A and a wealthy second-generation heir. And I was just a poor girl whose father disliked her and whose mother had passed away. I could only bury that throbbing feeling in my heart. Unexpectedly, after that day, Christopher seemed to shelter me under his wings. No one ever troubled me again. He even picked me up and dropped me off from work every day. Although I kept telling myself that Christopher and I were from two different worlds and that we wouldn't have a good ending. But I was so eager for love. After my mother died, I had lived alone for 8 years. Long nights and boundless loneliness accompanied me for those 8 years. So we got together naturally. I once told Christopher that my father had an affair when I was 12 and wanted to divorce my mother. But my mother didn't want to. So my father directly moved out and lived with his mistress. After 2 years of separation, they got divorced automatically. On the day my father held a wedding with his mistress, my mother, wearing the wedding dress from her own wedding, jumped off the 20th floor. Her bright red blood stained the white wedding dress scarlet. I watched my mother die right in front of me. I would never forget that. So I swore that I would never choose a white wedding dress. If the wedding dress was ordered white, then I would know that Christopher didn't want to marry me, and I would leave on my own. I will definitely remember. My bride will only be you. Christopher at 22 hugged me tightly and made this promise. I knew that with my conditions, Christopher's family wouldn't be satisfied with me as their daughter-in-law. So I worked even harder, opened a small studio, and took on orders desperately to make money. But this little achievement was nothing in the eyes of Christopher's family. In their eyes, I was an inferior person, a bastard without a father or a mother. But seeing Christopher, the pride of the heavens, willing to bend his back for me and kneel down to beg for their consent, I was willing to swallow all the humiliation. Even though we got married under Christopher's insistence, his family still didn't recognize me. They didn't allow us to hold a wedding and asked me to give up my job to take care of Christopher. For the sake of love, I was fearless. I dissolved my thriving studio and became a full-time housewife. It was not until this year when I got pregnant that my relationship with Christopher's family improved a bit, and I was allowed to hold a make-up wedding. No woman doesn't look forward to her own wedding. 7 years, I thought I was finally going to make it through. But just at the moment when my dream of 7 years was about to come true, it shattered. I should have realized it 7 years ago. Christopher and I were never meant to be together. In the end, I returned to the once lonely home. I still remembered that when I left here 7 years ago, I was full of joy. Finally, there was someone who could accompany me through the long nights. Unexpectedly, after going around in circles, I was alone again. "Miss Scarlett, the baby in your belly is already 3 months old and is very healthy. Are you sure you want to have an abortion?" The doctor asked me softly, with a hint of regret on her face. I looked at the tiny embryo on the screen, as if I could see what he would look like when he grew up. I raised my hand to wipe away the moisture from the corner of my eyes and nodded firmly. Even though this little life was what I had been looking forward to for 7 years, since I'm going to divorce Christopher, all relationships between us must be severed. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll be soft-hearted. Seeing my resolute attitude, the doctor just sighed and arranged the operation for the afternoon. While lying on the hospital bed waiting for the operation, the TV in the ward was broadcasting today's news. The century-long wedding of the president of the Christopher Group and his secretary. I thought I would be overcome with sadness, but I just felt a sense of relief as if it were expected. I watched Ava enter the venue in a white wedding dress, looking like a princess, beautiful and holy. To be fair, the wedding dress was beautiful, and the diamonds on the skirt sparkled brightly in the sun. Unfortunately, it wasn't suitable for me and didn't belong to me. The phone rang abruptly in the ward. I looked at the 2 words, Christopher, on the caller ID. I didn't want to answer at first, but after all, we had a 7-year relationship, and I should send him a blessing. As soon as I picked up the phone, before the other side could speak, I said first, "Happy wedding, Christopher. Remember to find time to finalize the divorce. Don't make Ava's status as your wife unacknowledged." I don't know which word angered Christopher. There was a few seconds of silence on the other end, and then his voice suddenly rose. "Scarlett, have you had enough of throwing a tantrum? It's just a wedding dress. How long has it been since that happened? Why can't you let it go? If you hadn't run away from home, I wouldn't have asked Ava to pretend to be the bride. Do you want everyone to know that my bride disappeared the day before our wedding? It was about the wedding dress, but not just the wedding dress." He clearly knew the deepest pain in my heart, yet he chose to ignore it and even expected me to let it go. But some things just can't be forgotten. I said softly, "Isn't this what you want? It just confirms Ava's reputation as a good assistant." The media didn't dare to get too close to Christopher. I could only vaguely see on the screen that Christopher rubbed his nose repeatedly. "Scarlett, this wedding is just for show to the media. You're still the Mrs. Christopher." The ceremony was probably about to start. Ava took Christopher's arm. Suddenly, she reached out to straighten Christopher's tie, looking so familiar as if she had done it many times, just like a virtuous wife. Christopher was holding the phone in one hand and arranging Ava's veil with the other, with an extremely gentle expression. I don't know if the baby sensed that his father was about to have a wedding with another woman, but my stomach suddenly ached. I tightened my grip on the phone and stared at Christopher on the screen. "Christopher, I'm serious about the divorce. I don't want to be Mrs. Christopher anymore. I'll also abort the baby today. After hearing this, will you rush over from the wedding venue?" The other end of the phone fell silent. There was no answer for a long time until Ava tugged at his sleeve. Christopher seemed to come to his senses. He frowned and said impatiently, "Scarlett, don't make a big deal out of it. Threatening me won't work. Can't you be more sensible? The wedding is about to start. How could I leave Ava alone?" My heart still couldn't help aching. Look, even if I told Christopher I was going to divorce him and abort the baby, he would only think I was throwing a tantrum and threatening him. Once, if there was even a hint of unhappiness in my words, he would try every means to make me happy. Now, he doesn't even want to spare a few words to perfunctorily comfort me. I looked at Christopher in a suit on the screen, just as handsome and tall as I had dreamed of countless times. He and Ava looked so well, matched standing together. Even the person in the next hospital bed praised them as a perfect couple. My vision gradually blurred. The promises of our youth had finally vanished with time. In the afternoon, I lay on the cold operating table. When I woke up, there was a small embryonic baby beside me. Looking at the faintly formed hands and feet, I couldn't help but red-eyed. I'm sorry, baby. I'm not lucky enough to be your mom. After a few days of rest to recover, I started to prepare to rebuild my studio. When Christopher's family asked me to dissolve the studio back then, I struggled. After all, it was my hard work, and the studio was in a rising period. Christopher held me and swore that it was okay to dissolve it. He said he hoped I could focus all my energy on him, and he would take care of me for a lifetime. I just needed to be Mrs. Christopher at ease. Now it seems that the most worthless thing in the world is a promise. During these days when I was running around to set up the studio, Christopher kept calling me. I told him that I would send him the divorce agreement after I drew it up, and then I directly blocked his number. But he changed a number and called again. I was really annoyed and picked up the phone, planning to hear what he really wanted to say. Scarlett, why have I had no news of you recently? How's the baby? Mom, Dad, and Grandma were really angry that you didn't show up at the wedding. They want you to come back today. You'd better think about how to ask Mom and Dad for forgiveness. They only started to accept you because of the baby. Look at how serious the consequences of your tantrum are. Christopher still thought my leaving was just a momentary tantrum, a new way to make him keep a distance from Ava. I touched my already flat abdomen and agreed to him. It was time for Christopher to realize that I wasn't kidding around. Every word I said was serious. And I also wanted to show Christopher's family, who had warned me not to think I could be the mistress of the Christopher family just because I was pregnant, that I didn't care about this position at all. Standing outside the Christopher family's old mansion, I felt a bit dazed. This was the third time I had come here. The first time I came, Christopher and I were still dating. He excitedly dragged me to introduce me to his family. But the way his family looked at me, I would never forget. They were so arrogant, as if I was just trash being trampled underfoot. The second time I came was during the spring festival in the first year after Christopher and I got married. I knew Christopher's family was not satisfied with me as a daughter-in-law. Before the visit, I pestered Christopher to find out their preferences. I also asked him to check the gifts to make sure his family would like them before I dared to buy them. When I nervously handed the gifts over, Christopher's mother didn't even look at them and asked the servant to take them to the utility room. Say, sorry, we never touch things of inferior people. At that moment, my face felt as if I had been slapped hard, burning with pain. For Christopher, I forced myself to endure it. I didn't want him to be caught in the middle and be in a difficult situation on this reunion day. Unexpectedly, Christopher erupted instead. He directly pulled me out of Christopher's family's old mansion and returned to our home. During that spring festival when there were only the two of us, he said, "Scarlett, I will never let you suffer grievances in front of my parents. You don't need to please them." In the cold winter, this simple sentence warmed my whole heart. At that time, I thought it would really be forever. But now, the man who once stood in front of me is also making me learn to please and be servile. However, it doesn't matter. I won't give them the chance to belittle me anymore. As soon as I stepped into Christopher's family's old mansion, I found that not only were Christopher's family members there, but Ava was also sitting next to Christopher. Christopher's mother was lovingly picking food for her. Even the old lady who usually never smiles was made to laugh by Ava. What I had once tried so hard to get was easily obtainable for Ava. Right, Ava graduated from a prestigious university, and both of her parents are university professors. It can be regarded as a family of scholars. Even though Christopher's family is not absolutely satisfied with Ava, she is still much better than me, the so-called inferior person without parents in their mouths. I stood there, and Christopher's family seemed not to see me and continued eating. A flash of pride crossed Ava's eyes. She hypocritically said, "Sister Scarlett, it seems there's one chair short. Why don't you sit here?" As she spoke, she pretended to stand up. Christopher's grandmother snorted, "Ava, you're not allowed to give up your seat to her." Sit still. She can eat when she realizes her mistake. How dare she run away from home while carrying a descendant of our Christopher family? If we don't teach her a lesson, she'll really think she's Mrs. Christopher. Humph, don't think a marriage certificate means anything. You're not the bride in the wedding. If it weren't for the fact that you're carrying a child of the Christopher family, I'd make Christopher divorce you immediately. Ava couldn't hide the pride on her face. Christopher was giving me a wink, meaning for me to apologize quickly. To calm the anger of Christopher's family, but I pretended not to notice and said with a smile, "Look at Ava, she's clearly acting for you. She's so eager to stick herself to Christopher, how could she be willing to give me her seat? You're really stupid to believe this." Ava, who was secretly leaning towards Christopher's side, froze instantly, then put on a wronged expression. "Sister Scarlett, how could you think of me like this? I've always regarded President Christopher as just my boss." Christopher's grandmother had lived a smooth life and had never been publicly humiliated like this. She was so angry that she was out of breath. You ill-bred woman." Christopher's mother quickly helped his grandmother to calm down. Christopher couldn't sit still either. He suddenly stood up, grabbed my wrist and warned me, "Scarlett, my patience has its limits. You keep causing trouble again and again. What on earth do you want to do? Apologize quickly, or don't blame me for being heartless." I forcefully broke free from his grip. Looking at the red and swollen mark on my wrist, the resentment I had accumulated over the years erupted in an instant. I raised my hand and slapped Christopher hard. "My patience also has limits. I've had enough of your family. There's no way I'll apologize." Christopher's mother and Ava rushed over worriedly to check his injury. Christopher's father was so angry that he pointed at my nose and cursed. How could my Christopher family's grandson have such a shrew for a mother? "You've simply defiled the blood of our Christopher family." "Shrew, huh?" I sneered. "This is just the beginning." I picked up a glass of red wine on the table and splashed it on Ava. Then I slapped her 2 slaps left and right. Ava's delicate curly hair was instantly ruined, sticking to her face messily. I looked at her with a smile. "If you're a mistress, you should be aware that you might get beaten." Before anyone could react, I suddenly pulled off the tablecloth. With a clatter, the delicate food turned into disgusting puddles of liquid, splashing onto the clothes of Christopher's family members. No one was spared. Probably no one could have imagined that I, who had been submissive for the past 7 years, would do such a shocking thing. For a moment, no one dared to step forward. Thinking about the humiliation I've endured in the past 7 years, I felt extremely carefree at this moment. After my mother passed away, many people tried to take advantage of me seeing me living alone. I had long since erected a body full of thorns. Whoever dared to bully me, I'd fight back. I put away all my thorns for Christopher's sake and was willing to be a little white rabbit. Now that I think about it, being submissive just makes the other side ride over you. Only by fighting back will others be afraid. Do you really think everyone in your Christopher family is some kind of royal relative and everyone treasures it? Let me tell you, I'm the one who wants a divorce now. After saying that, I took out the divorce agreement I had prepared long ago and slapped it onto Christopher. Christopher's mother pointed at me, telling Christopher to agree quickly. The Christopher family couldn't afford such a disgraceful daughter-in-law like me. But Christopher seemed not to hear. He stepped forward and grabbed my hand, frowning. "Scarlett, you've gone too far this time. I know pregnant women are emotionally unstable, but you shouldn't have made such a mess at home. You clean this up quickly and then apologize one by one." Probably because the topic of the child was brought up, Christopher's family members seemed to wake up from a dream and change their tune. Christopher's grandmother even bluntly said that she would take the child away as soon as it was born. They wouldn't give me the chance to get close to the child, for fear that I would turn the descendants of the Christopher family into a vulgar shrew. I knew that Christopher's family attached great importance to the child. Otherwise, they wouldn't have agreed to hold a make-up wedding after learning that I was pregnant. Once, I also hoped that the child could change Christopher's family's impression of me, but now it seems that I was too naive. They looked down on me from the bottom of their hearts. Even if I gave birth to the child, they would only regard me as a tool for giving birth to the bloodline of the Christopher family. The make-up wedding was just to give the bloodline of the Christopher family a legitimate status, not to recognize me as Mrs. Christopher. Unfortunately, their wish was about to come to nothing. I took out a box from my bag and stuffed it into Christopher's hand. The child is here. And I've already signed the divorce agreement. I believe President Christopher, a busy man, always has time to sign it. After saying that, I left without looking back. Behind me, there was a scream from Christopher's grandmother and Christopher's crazy roar of Scarlet. I didn't care about the chaotic scene in the Christopher family anymore. I went straight home, took a bath, and lay comfortably on the bed. I just felt that I had never been so carefree in the past 7 years. I had been acting submissively in the Christopher family for so long that I almost forgot who I was. Probably being extremely angry, Christopher kept calling me from different numbers. I was so annoyed by his calls that I simply turned off my phone. I didn't want to have any more contact with Christopher's family. I just hoped that Christopher would sign the divorce agreement as soon as possible. In the following days, the studio got on the right track. Although I hadn't worked for 7 years, my abilities were still there. There were more and more cooperation orders. I was so busy every day that I didn't even have time to rest. I would go home and fall asleep as soon as I hit the bed. I thought the next time we met would be when we got the divorce certificate, but I didn't expect to meet a haggard Christopher at my doorstep. Probably because work had filled my whole life these days, seeing Christopher again gave me a sense of déjà vu. Scarlet, why? Why did you abort our child? These days, Grandma was so angry that she was hospitalized. The Christopher family is in chaos. But just a few days ago, we were still preparing for the wedding. I thought I was going to be the happiest man in the world. How could everything be gone in just a few days? Christopher covered his head in pain. He really seemed not to understand why. I looked at him calmly. Christopher, I gave you a chance. It was you who chose not to want him. Christopher tightly grasped my shoulders, his expression agitated. But it was you who chose not to go to the wedding first. I had no choice but to find Ava. Just a wedding dress. Couldn't you even endure wearing it for a few hours? Just because of this, you sentenced me to death, wanted to divorce me, and even aborted our child? Until now, Christopher still hasn't figured out why I want to divorce him. In his eyes, everything is just because I'm being overly sensitive and making a mountain out of a molehill. Christopher, is it just about this? Ava has been in the company for 4 years. How many times have you left me behind and chosen her in these 4 years? When the car broke down on a rainy day, you went to her. When she got drunk, you went to pick her up. Even when she was sick, you went to the hospital to take care of her. But did you ever think about me? Do you know how I felt every time I saw those messages? And your family, in their mouths, I'm an inferior person, a bastard. I could endure all these for you. But after Ava came, you started to blame me for not being pleasing enough, making me humble myself and be servile to your family members. Every time your Christopher family members looked at me, their eyes were like needles piercing my heart, making me feel like I was a dirty piece of trash. Once some words are spoken, it's like a reservoir with the sluice opened, and they can never be taken back. I shouted at him hysterically, venting out all the grievances I had suffered over the years. Christopher had never seen me so out of control. He was completely stunned and stood there motionless. After I finished venting and finally calmed down, I didn't want to entangle with Christopher any longer and turned to leave. But Christopher, as if waking up from a dream, grabbed my wrist, his lips trembling slightly. Scarlet, I didn't know you had suffered so much. Why haven't you told me all these years? There was a look of bewilderment, pain, and helplessness on Christopher's face that I had never seen before, but there was no guilt. I glanced at him mockingly and forcefully shook off his hand. Don't know? I don't think so. I had told Christopher about the grievances I suffered countless times, hoping to find a shoulder to rely on, but he would only turn a blind eye and blame me for being unreasonable. Weren't the blatant mockery from his family and the unscrupulous provocation from the secretary all indulged by his indifferent attitude towards me? Now he says I didn't tell him. How ridiculous. I've endured all these things for 4 years. Today, I don't want to endure anymore. Scarlett, I will change in the future. I really have nothing with Ava. And we won't go back to the Christopher family in the future. Let's just live our own lives, okay? Our 7-year relationship, Scarlett. Are you really willing to give it up like this? I hadn't seen Christopher look so flustered in a long time. But he was wrong. It wasn't 7 years. Since the moment Ava came to the company 4 years ago, our relationship started to deteriorate. Until now, it can no longer maintain that false shell and has become a mess. Christopher, I've thought it through clearly. I don't love you anymore. Christopher's eyes turned red. Scarlett, when we got married, we said we would be together for a lifetime. Have you forgotten? Give me another chance, okay? I also believed that the promise we made when we got married was sincere, but sincerity is something that changes in an instant. I shook my head, shattering his last glimmer of hope. No. There's no possibility for us anymore. Sign the divorce agreement. Don't make me hate you. Christopher's body swayed. I ignored him, entered the house, and closed the door. Perhaps because Christopher felt guilty, he drew up a new divorce agreement. The property in it was even more than the original one. There's no reason to refuse the money at hand. It could just be used to expand the scale of the studio. So I signed it readily. On the night I got the divorce certificate, I clearly saw Christopher's car parked downstairs all night. There were cigarette butts all over the ground. I threw myself into the expansion of the studio. In just 1 month, the scale doubled. The next time I heard news about Christopher was a call from Christopher's mother. The woman who had always looked down on me now seemed very cautious. Scarlett, can you come and see Christopher? Ava has been fired by him. He has been working day and night this month and refuses to stop at all. I forced him to rest because I'm really worried about his health, but he won't listen to me. Please come and see him. Hearing her sobbing voice, I agreed. Anyway, the first 3 years with Christopher were happy. When I saw Christopher, I could hardly recognize him. The once meticulous him now had a scruffy beard, a haggard face, and dark circles under his eyes. The moment he saw me, Christopher looked a little flustered. Scarlett, why are you here? I'm in such a state right now. I interrupted him. Christopher, the happiness you brought me once was real. I don't hate you now. One can't be trapped in the past, we have to look forward. Christopher covered his cheeks in pain, and tears trickled down onto the floor through his fingers. Scarlett, I really don't know what happened to me these past few years. At first, I clearly hated Ava, but later I unconsciously paid more attention to her. But believe me, I really didn't do anything to you. I sighed, all of this doesn't matter anymore. It's all in the past. The problem between us was never Ava. Look forward, Christopher. There's still a long way to go in life. After saying that, I left the Christopher family's old mansion, ignoring the sobs coming from behind. I still have to rush to negotiate a cooperation in the afternoon. Now, there are more and more orders for the studio. Being fully engaged in work, I feel like I'm back to when I was 22 years old. The sunlight shines on me, and I have my life firmly in my own hands.